Are you looking to use Python to automate Cisco Nexus switches? Well, in this video, I'm going to show you how. Hi, my name is Rich and welcome to the Rich Tech Guy channel. About a year ago, I put out a video where I deployed VXLAN onto Cisco Nexus switches, and I did that using Python. And I will link to that video up above and in the description down below. But one of the key elements to being able to do that is to write a Python file that will interface with the NXAPI on those Cisco Nexus switches. So in this video, I'm going to do a step-by-step tutorial on how to build out that Python file with the functions necessary to talk to a Cisco Nexus 9000 series switch. Alright, so before I get into this, can you please do me a favor and hit that like button down below? And also, if you haven't subscribed to this channel, go ahead and hit the subscribe button and check out the great content that I've got on here. So without any further delay, let's get into this tutorial. So the first thing to note is that in order for all of this to work, and in order to interface with the NXAPI, we have to enable that feature on the switch. So right now I'm logged into the switch, and first of all, just to check that it's enabled, I'm just going to do a show feature and FAEAT URE, and I'm going to search specifically for the NXAPI. Okay, NXAPI is enabled. If it isn't, if it wasn't, then you would just go into configuration mode and type in feature NXAPI, and that would enable it. I don't need to do that because it's already enabled. So once you have that feature enabled, what you're going to do is you are going to go to your switch's management 0 interface, the IP address that you configured most likely during the initial setup of the Nexus switch. And in order to do that, what we're going to do is we're going to pull that up on a web browser. And when you go into it, first thing it's going to do is it's going to ask you to sign in. So let's go ahead and sign in. We're signed in to the NXAPI sandbox. Now, I've already shown this before in my previous videos, but let's take a deeper dive in actually using it and getting code from that and working with that code. So the way that I use it to interface with a Nexus switch, there are multiple ways you can go about this, but the way that I use it, it was just easiest for me, is on the method here, I would select NXAPI CLI. You could go with a DME REST conf, or you can do a REST conf with Yang. As I said, I prefer to utilize the NXAPI CLI. That way I can just feed it the CLI commands that I already know. In the message format, I'm going to just set this to JSON. And now I've got some command types here. I've got CLI show, CLI conf, and so on and so forth. So we're going to create Python functions for 3 of these. The first one I'm going to start with here is I'm going to start with this CLI show. And what we're going to do with that is, let's say I just want to show a command. I want to do show interface, so show interface brief. So I just want to pull a list of the interfaces. Now right here, it already built out what the request is going to be. So if I click on Python, let's skip over Python and go straight to Python 3, as we really should be writing all our code in Python 3 at this point. And here we go. We have this code here. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to grab this code right here, and we're going to go ahead and copy it. And then I'm going to go into a code editor. I particularly prefer to use VS Code. And we create a new file. So I've already created the file nxcall.py. And now I've just copied the code into it. So one of the things we're going to notice straight away here is we've got this import request. And it's already flagging it because it says I don't have that. So we're just going to have to make sure we've got that particular code available to us. So I'm just going to pop over to another screen here. And okay, so since I'm running Python 3.10 on here as my Python 3 environment, I'm going to go ahead and do a pip 3.10 install requests. All right, and I've had some of the prerequisites installed. All right, so we've got requests installed now. I should be able to go back into VS Code now, and everything's great. We've got my requests. The error has cleared. We're all good. All right, so this right now will kind of work, and the code will run, but first of all, it hasn't transferred the username. It hasn't transferred the password over from the API generator. So what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to add a username and password. Now, of course, it's not a good idea to just put that into the code in clear text. So what we're going to do actually is we're going to go in here, and we're just going to go ahead and comment these lines out. And you know what, we'll go ahead and comment all this stuff out too. So there we go, and at this point let's convert this into a function. Okay, so this is for doing a show on a Nexus switch. So we're issuing a show command. So let's call this function NXShow. And now let's pass some variables. Okay, so we need to pass username, and we need to pass a password. And we're going to need to send a URL. Actually, there's a URL right here. We're going to make some edits to that. But if we're going to use this as a function, we need the URL of the switch. So let's just go ahead and put that in there. And the last thing we're going to need for this as a function is we're going to need to put in the command that we are sending to the switch. So we're going to do that. We're going to make that a function, and let's just go ahead and tab everything over so that the it falls inside of the function. Right? Great so far. Now, as I said, we're going to be using some information here that we need to apply, and one of the things that we're going to apply first is, let's take a look at this address here. Well, right now I've got it hard-coded to my switch's address, but what if we want to interface with another switch? So I'm going to go ahead and close that out, and we're going to insert the address into that string. And that will be our new URL. So kind of. The Nexus switch, that's the other issue here. The Nexus switch is actually going to require HTTPS. I don't know why the code generator just goes with HTTP, but yeah, we're going to need to put an S in here. This is going to cause another problem for us because my Nexus switches are self-signed as far as HTTPS goes. Okay, this is going to be looking for a valid certificate. It's not going to find one, and so it's going to error out. So I'm going to have to add something else in here, and I'm going to put it in right here, where I'm going to go verify equals false. Okay, now if you do have self-signed if you do have your switches with an actual security certificate, you don't need to do that. You really shouldn't do that, but to get around the self-signed problem, you have to put that in there. All right, so the next thing that we're going to do is actually the code here initially generated with a variable switch user and switch password. We're going to go ahead and change that to just user and password. All right. Actually, it's without the 2 letters there. All right. So now we're going to be using those variables. The last one here is the command. So at this point, I've hard-coded into it because that's what was generated by the API tool, is that show interface brief command I made. Well, I don't want that show interface brief command. I want to do the actual command that I have fed into it. So we're going to go ahead and get rid of that and just put in the variable. Okay, we're almost done with this function. All right, now the thing that we're going to have to do is we're going to have to return the function. So we can just say straight up return response and be done with it. But when we go back into the generator, and by the way, if you've been out of it for a long time, it just kicks you out. So we're going to have to go back in and retry and redo this. So I'm just going to go ahead and log in. And we're going to have to again redo our settings. CLI show. Okay, we're going to go ahead and redo the settings here as okay. And again, we've got this code generated here. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to hit send on this, and now it's going to show me down here is the response back. Okay, so when it comes back and delivers all this JSON formatted data, right? So this is great, but I may not necessarily want this data, okay? In fact, maybe I want to start right here at this output field where I have the command that was sent, I have the HTTP message, the HTTP code, and then it's going to go through every single interface on the device and display a JSON output of that data. So if I were to just start with output right here, what I can do is, when I go back into the code here, actually first we need to check our hierarchy here. So we have this NXAPI, and then we have outputs, and then output is the actual portion of it. So we want to strip away all this other stuff here. All right, so I'm going to put this in as response, and we're going to do NXAPI. Outputs, and now we're going to say output. So now when we return that from the function, the data that we're going to start with is at this output, which we can work with a little bit easier. Okay? So the next thing that we're going to do is when we have all this here, we've got all this JSON formatted code. Now this is great if we are going to use this in our code and work with that information to maybe set up the next set of commands that we want to send to the switch. But what if we just want to display the actual show interface brief output as you would see it on a Nexus switch? So if I was on the Nexus switch here, and let's just go ahead and pop over to the switch here and just do a show interface brief. Well, what if I actually want to see that? What if I wanted to show that data? Okay, I can do that by creating another function, and so in order to do that, we're going to pop back over into our API sandbox, and this time I'm going to say CLI show ASCII. All right, we've got our show interface brief command, and it's regenerated the request here, so I got to click off of Python 3 and then click back on. But what we're going to have here is the new code for that. Now we can go ahead and put that into a function, but what really changed in all of this, in this code here, was this payload section. That's what changed, okay? The type changed from CLI show to CLI show ASCII, and actually that was about it. So this is what I can go ahead and do at this point, is if I go back into my VS Code here, and let's create a new definition, and this will be NX show, and I'm going to make it _H for human readable. Okay, we're going to pass the exact same parameters to it. So user, password, address, and command. Okay. And then I'm just going to go ahead and copy all of this code from the first function and paste it in here. Now, I could go and I could just go ahead and replace this entire payload section. Okay, and you know what? Actually, that's the safe thing, or I could just change this type to CLI show ASCII. I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to grab the payload off of here. So I'm going to go ahead and grab that, and now I'm going to just strip that out. Okay, we're going to have to make sure we've got our brackets tabbed out right, and we've got this, but again we've got our hard-coded command, so we just need to change that out again with command. Okay, so now when we call this function for the human readable output, what's going to happen is it's going to get that information, send the command off, and then it's going to actually show it as it would show it if you were logged into the switch and typed in that command. So because of that, we're going to make our return a little bit different. Again, we're going to get the return response. And now let's pop back over into the sandbox, and we'll go ahead and send that command over. And what we're after here is this body field. That is formatted for your terminal exactly how it would show up as if it was run on the Nexus switch. So what I'm going to do here is it's now INSAPI. Output, and then body is the actual information that I want to return. So, you know what, I can just go ahead and copy all of that from the above function, and we'll go ahead and type in body. So now it's going to return that. So if I were to call this function and say I just wanted to or run a print command, call the function, and so it would print what got returned. There we go. It would just return that, and it would print it out exactly as if it was logged into a Nexus switch. All right. So this is great for these show commands. Now, what happens if we want to configure something on the switch? Okay, this is where things are going to get a little bit different. And what we're going to do here is I'm actually going to create the same definition intro here, except instead of NX show, let's call it NX config. All right. And now we're going to go into this. This information here, the URL, my headers, it's going to be the same. What's going to change again is going to be the payload. So we'll go ahead and copy that over. we can even just put a space here for the payload and go ahead and put in the response here. So that way we're going to have that as it needs to be. So all of this is going to be fine. But now let's go back into the into here, and we're going to set the command here to CLI conf. Okay, that's for configure. And now we get an extra parameter here. We get an error action. So what happens if we send a command to the switch and it doesn't like it? Maybe the command was a bad command. Maybe the switch just cannot perform that config command. For example, let's say you have not enabled feature OSPF and you send it a router OSPF command. All right, so it's going to error out. So how are we going to handle the error? Well, we've got 3 options here. We can stop on the error, we can continue on the error, or we can roll back on the error. Okay? The one I least recommend here is continue on the error, because basically it's going to error out. Your code is just going to ignore the error, and it's just going to keep pushing, and you're probably just going to generate more and more errors because the code that was originally sent didn't take. Now, if we stop on error, that's one of our options. It hits an error, it stops, and we could have our code account for that and check to make sure that we didn't get that error back and go with that. The issue I have with that is maybe we go in and we fix the problem and we rerun the code, but now we've got something half configured and maybe the code isn't going to account for that. So that's where I like to go with rollback on error. And if you'll notice, it's configuring here, rollback on error. And okay, I've got this show interface brief command, but we're not going to do a show command. Okay, let's say I'm going to enter in as just an example. I'm going to go ahead and enter in maybe an interface configuration. So I'm going to select interface. Let's just say ETH1/5, and now I'm going to do a new line, and now I'm going to say, okay, I want that to be a layer 3 port, so I'm going to say no switch port, and then I'm going to give it an IP address. Okay, IP address, let's just throw in, say, 192.168. We'll go with 50.1 and we'll make it a /24. And just for good measure, let's no shut the port. Okay, it should be in a no shut state, but you know what, maybe we just want to make sure. So if we take a look at our request, here's what happened. We have a interface, the interface command, we have a semicolon, and then we have the next command, and then we have a semicolon, and we have the next command, and then we have a semicolon, okay, and then the final command. All right, now the other thing to note is there is a space between the command and every semicolon. This is very important when you're writing your code later. Okay, if you don't put this space here, what's going to happen is when it gets sent over to the Nexus switch, it's going to interpret that semicolon as being part of the command. So it needs that space in there to recognize that the command you've entered in has changed or has ended, and now you are feeding it a new command. And in fact, you can actually send commands in the CLI just like this. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and grab this, but I'm going to make a slight change to it. All right, so let's pop over to my interface here with the switch, and let's just go ahead and paste that in there. Okay, but now I'm going to change interfaces, and let's say that's going to be 160, and now I'm going to do that. Actually, you know what? Before I do that, let's just go ahead and verify that there's no configuration on here. So, you know what? Let's just go ahead and delete everything out here. All right. So let's just go ahead and clear the line. And we'll do a show run interface ETH1/6. Okay, there we go. We see that the interface is blank, that there's no configuration. All right. So now we're going to go ahead and configure that interface. And this is just a single line of command, but I've given it the multiple commands. And notice how it comes back and it shows me in the interface config layer of the Nexus switch. But if I do a show run and interface Ethernet 1.6, the config has been applied. So this is essentially what we're doing with the Nexus switch, only now we're just going to send it over as Python code. But just in case you didn't realize, you could fire off multiple commands on a single command line interface to a Nexus switch. Well, now you know. All right, so let's pop back over to the other area here, and we're going to go ahead and get the Python code here. And as I said, the URL stayed the same, the header stayed the same, the payload changed. Okay, the payload changed. It says CLI conf, and then it's added this other parameter here for rollback on error. And then the response at the end has stayed the same as well. So let's just go ahead and grab this payload section. And I'm going to go ahead and put this in here. All right, and let's make sure our brackets are tabbed out right. And the other thing we need to do is we have to change this command to be a, in order for the command to work, we need to just change it to the variable. All right. So at this point, we may want to enter in some, let's go ahead and add some comments here. So send show command to Nexus switch and receive JSON response. Okay, this is going to be another one here. Send show command to Nexus switch and receive human readable response. Oh, and yeah, it just kicked me out of my, I haven't been doing some activity there, so it just kicked me out of the toolbox. All right, so we'll deal with that again later. All right, and now let's go to this one. And this is, we're going to have to do some, probably feed some extra documentation in on this one. And the response that we're going to get, actually, we're going to have to work with that too. So we're going to return response. And again, let's go ahead and head back into the sandbox, log in. And we're going to have to feed it or make our configuration again. All right, we'll go ahead and do that. And let's do interface, Ethernet. I set up the code here to do 1.5. All right, and then we are going to no switch port, so make it a layer 3 interface. We're going to set the IP address. All right, and then we're going to no shut it. Okay, so again, we've got that code there. There's our request. Let's see what kind of a response we're going to get back. It's going to be a little bit different. Okay, now what we've got is we have this response that came back, and so we've got the NXAPI, we have the outputs, and we have output. All right, so we can go ahead and grab those same fields from the response. All right, so we can just go ahead and grab that from, say, one of our previous functions and just copy that in. All right. And at this point, we're good to go. But the thing to note is that we are going to receive in that output, okay, we've got a bracket, which in Python would be a list. And then, we've got the curly bracket here, so that would imply a dictionary, which again, it's dictionary formatted data here. One of the things I love about working with JSON when working with Python. So this is where we're basically going to get a list of dictionaries as our return data. And all the dictionaries are going to show here is it's going to show the code, the HTTP code, and the message corresponding to that code. Okay? So for every command that we sent over, we're going to get that same HTTP code and the corresponding response. So that's something that we can just build into our checks in the code to say, hey, if we get a code 200 success, awesome. Move on with the code. If we get something else, then we need to address that. So when we're building out our Python code, and in order to automate the Nexus switch, we just need to make sure we account for getting that that code back and verifying that, hey, we got a successful data trend or command input, or we did not get a successful command input, and so our code needs to handle the error. All right, so at this point, let's go ahead and add this code or this comment here. So this is going to be send config command to Nexus switch. I just realized I spelt that wrong up here. So, and make sure I got it right on the first one. Okay. Okay, send config commands to Nexus switch and receive a list of dictionaries with HTTP code responses for each command. All right. The other thing I want to do is let's go ahead and add one more piece of the documentation here and say that we want to send multiple commands. So send multiple commands by separating. Okay, so we're going to do it by separating each command with space, semicolon, and then we go to our new command. Okay, we may want to reference space before semicolon. Okay, so that way when we're using this in our code, we're going to go ahead and we can go ahead and look at the comment and say, oh, okay, if I want to send multiple commands, I need to have that space semicolon separation between each command. All right, at this point, I'm going to go ahead and save this, and we now have workable code. Okay, now at this point, I can't run this. I can't really test this because all it's going to do is it's just going to load the functions and then do nothing. This is basically designed so if I was going to write some other code, like say I wrote that program for deploying VXLAN onto the switch, we could use it by importing the nxcall.py file into our other Python script and then refer to the functions. Now I can't just simply run this particular file right now, because if I do, all it's going to do is it's going to load the functions and then do nothing, and we're done with the program. So what we want to do, of course, as I said, is we're going to import the nxcall.py file into another program. Like say, for example, when on my other video where I created a Python script to deploy VXLAN onto Nexus switches, I created a file similar to this, and then I just imported it into the other Python scripts, which I then utilized and used the functions from this in order to send commands. I would either send a config command to the switch and check the HTTP code, or I would maybe send a show command and then parse the data out from that JSON response of the show command and use that to kind of level set and check where things were, so that way I knew what the next commands to send would be. But let's go ahead and make this code in a testable way, so that way we can actually run this and go ahead and give it a try. So in order to do that, I'm going to add some extra code here. Now everything from this point on is essentially optional. This is really just to check this file and make sure it works. One of the things that I am also going to do is I'm going to put the final file on my GitHub, so you can go ahead and check it out over there. Alright, so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to create a if name equals main function or parameter. And so now, if you're not familiar with what this is here in Python, just real quickly, basically, as I said before I wrote this, if I ran the code on here, and all it would do is it would load the functions and then it would be done. It was designed to be imported. Well, if I were to just go ahead and write my test code without this function, what would happen is it would import it and it would actually run the code in this portion, which I don't necessarily want it doing. So this is where I have this if name equals main, which basically means that if I am running this file as it is and not as an imported file, then it's going to check the name of this particular script. There's going to be a return back that has that main statement in it, and it's going to run the code here. Whereas if I import it into, say, another program, another Python script, and it's going to run that name, and it's going to actually get the name of the file rather than main. And so it won't run this code. So this is how I can now use this to run and demonstrate it. All right. So the other thing I'm going to do here is I want to just go back and I'm going to import something else here which is going to be necessary as part of this function. So I'm going to go ahead and import something called getPass. And what that's going to allow me to do is it's going to allow me to do some input for password input where it doesn't, okay, it just kicked me out of the toolbox again. It's going to do some password input for without actually showing what's entered in as the password. All right, so that being said, let's go ahead and run through this. And what I'm going to do at this point is I'm going to, first, we're going to get our address variable. So let's say address, and that's going to equal, and let's do a string input And let's give it a prompt here. So we need to do the management 0 address for the switch. Okay, so that's going to give us our address variable. And then we're going to get our username. And that again, we're going to make a string of input. And let's just go ahead and say enter username. All right, and then now we're going to deviate a little because now I need the password and I don't want that inputted in clear text. So password is going to be getPass.getPass. And in here we're going to do a prompt equals. Okay, and this is going to be password. And now I also need to determine how I want the stream to be displayed. So the stream will be none. Okay. At this point, I need to feed some more instructions before I get the next command. So let's do a print statement. And let's just say enter the commands. And let's put some parentheses around the S here. Okay. Let's do another print statement. And let's say for show commands, enter one command. Okay, and now we're going to do another print statement. And for configuration commands, we're going to enter all commands separated by space semicolon. Okay, and also make that additional note of space before semicolon. Okay, now let's go ahead and get that command. So command, so all right, so let's do command equals, and that will be string again of input, and they'll put the prompt here. Okay, so now we're getting our data from the user inside of this script. So what we need to do now is we need to see if we're getting a show command or if we're getting a config command. All right, so in this case, let's say if command dot lower, because we want to just check to see if the lowercase letters match a parameter. So command dot lower, and what we're going to do is I want to start at the beginning of the string, and I want to take 2 characters. All right, and that's going to equal show. All right, so again, this is, if we're working on a Nexus switch and we're in the NXOS, oftentimes you don't actually type out the full word show, just type in SH. So we're just going to get that. And then let's say we're going to get our Nexus response. So let's do NX response. And that is going to equal NX show, and let's get the address, or actually we're going to get the, what do I have first here? I've got user password address command. All right, so we're going to start with the user. Okay, we're going to get the password. We're going to get the address and the command. Okay. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to say print command sent to switch at, and we'll put a little space here. Okay, plus address. Now that address, I just want to make a note here. I'm using IP addresses. If, say, you're working with a switch in your environment that has a fully qualified domain name and you've got your DNS set up to go to it, you could use the DNS identifier for the switch as well. All right, and let's close out that print command. Oops. Okay, let's do another print command. And let's say response. And we'll go ahead and give NX response. And this is where it's going to come in handy to know what is coming back. So again, we're going to have to pop into here, admin, and we're going to go ahead and say, or get my password in here. Okay, so now again, NXAPI CLI, JSON, this is a CLI show, show interface, brief. We're going to send that. Okay, we've already stripped out everything to this output point here. Okay, now notice we've got a code, we have a message, and we have a body. Okay? So, yeah, look at all that fun stuff there. Okay? So at this point what I'm going to do is I'm going to say NX response, and it's going to be body, or actually no, first I'm going to grab the code. So we have the response, here's our code for the response, and from there we are going to we're going to add on to that with a comma and a space, and then we're going to add on to that NX response, and this time we're going to do the message. So what it's going to display is it's going to say response, it's going to give the code, comma, and the message associated with that code. So say 200 success, right? Next up is we are going to go with all that stuff in the body. Now, because I'm just doing this as a means for testing, I'm not really trying to parse it out. I'm just going to do a JSON dump. But ideally what you would probably want to do at this point is you would actually probably want to do a for loop, and you would cycle through all of the data using a for loop. But instead I'm going to do a JSON dumps and NX response, and this time I'm just going to grab body And we're going to go ahead and set a indent on it, so that way we get a formatted JSON instead of just a massive blob of text. Indent equals, let's set that to 2. Okay, so that's going to cover the first function I've created here. Let's also put the output in human readable form. Alright, so in this case I'm going to say NX, or what I'm going to do now is I'm going to say print, and this time I'm going to say NX show -h or _h, and we're going to give the function here. So again, user name, alright, password, address, and command. And that's it. So what it's going to do now is it's going to say where the address that the switch was sent to. It is going to say the HTTP code, and then comma success, or comma whatever that code is, 200 success. And then it's going to just do a massive JSON dump. So it's formatted JSON of what that response was. But then I'm also going to tack on to the end of that a human readable version of the code, or the response, the output. All right, so let's go ahead and save this file, and we can go ahead and test it. So I'm just going to go ahead and hit play here. And okay, asking me for the the IP address for the switch. All right, so let's go ahead and enter that in. All right, let's do the username. All right, password. So notice with that get pass, it didn't show the password. All right, so let's do a show command. Let's again say, let's do a show, and we'll do the IP interface brief. All right, and let's send the command over. Okay, so here we go. We've got everything set here. And we have our command was sent to the switch at that IP address, response 200 success. And there is the JSON output that it received. And there it is in human readable format. So we can go ahead and take a look at what that was. And it shows exactly as if it had been shown on the Nexus switch. All right. So that's great. Now what happens if we want to send a config command? So let's go ahead and do that. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to exit, or instead of that, we're going to say else. So if we didn't detect that SH, we didn't have that show, let's go ahead and do the config command. So if it's not a show command, we're going to do NX response. Let's go ahead and use the same variable here, equals NX show, or not show, we're going to use NX config, and username, password, address, and command. Okay, now what I'm going to do is, if we remember from previously, the output from sending the config command is for every command we sent over, it returned what the HTTP code was and the message associated with that code. So I'm going to do a for loop, and let's do for reply in NX response. So now it's going to iterate through that list that we're going to get, the list of dictionaries. And I'm going to say print And let's do reply with code. Okay, let's add on to the string here with the comma space, and then add on to the string again with reply and the message. Okay, and that is it. Now we've got our code here. We're going to test the config function. Let's save the file here, and we're going to go ahead and test the actual config commands here. So let's go ahead and run this. And again, the management IP address, 17, oops, I'm not in the right area here. Okay, 172, all right. And I'm going to put in the username, password. All right, so now we got to enter in those config commands. Make sure we separate them by space, semicolon. Okay, so let's configure, do just a quick, say, OSPF instance. So I'm going to say feature OSPF, and then I'm going to say let's create a loopback interface for the router ID. And give it an IP address. Let's just say 10.10.20.1/32. And we'll now add a OSPF config command to it. So router OSPF. Let's give it the name. Let's say underlay, like we're trying to start a VXLAN configuration. All right, and then now let's, actually I need to put the area on it. Okay, so now let's go into the actual OSPF configuration. So IP, router, OSPF, underlay, area 000, or underlay, that's where I'm going to stop. And then router ID is going to be so 10.10.20.1. And let's see if I got all those config commands entered in properly. So it's going to send it off. Okay, I got it wrong. And I saw where I got it wrong. Okay, so we're going to have to do this again real quickly. I have a mistake in my code right here where I did not close out the bracket for the code. And now I have an extra bracket. Okay, let's save that again. And let's run through it again. Okay. So again, the IP address 172.16. All right, let's put in the username. And yeah, we're going to go ahead and enter in a bunch of commands again. So feature OSPF, and interface loopback 1, and then we're going to set the IP address, and it was 10.10.20.1/32. Okay, router OSPF, underlay, area and make it area 0, IP router OSPF. Is it IP router or is it IP OSPF? Great. It's IP OSPF actually. It should be IP OSPF underlay. Yeah, it's oftentimes you second guess yourself, and unfortunately I don't have the benefit of the question mark when I'm doing it this way. IP OSPF underlay and router ID is going to be 10.10.20.1. Okay, let's see if that worked. Oh, actually it was IP router OSPF. So, as we can see, and this actually tests the responses here. So I got for each command here, I got 200 success for the feature OSPF. I got another one for interface loopback 1. I got another one for IP address here. Actually, it had a problem here. I did that one wrong. So anyways, like I said, I don't have the benefit of the question mark. But if I were to head back over to the switch here, actually, let's do a show feature. It should have rolled back. If it generated an error, it should have rolled back based on the code. So show feature, include OSPF. I should see, yep, it's all disabled. Okay. So, just for my own sanity here, let's just do a feature OSPF. Oops, I need to configure it. And let's do an interface LO1, IP add is here 10.10.20.1. And it's a /32. Okay, so I tried saying router OSPF underlay. This is where it had a command problem. Okay, yeah. See, that's where I get mixed up sometimes. Router OSPF underlay is to actually create the OSPF function. I should have sent the command IP router OSPF underlay. And now I should get the area part. Okay. So what I'm going to do, just for sake of brevity here and time, is we're going to run through this again. Okay. But now I've already configured some of the OSPF commands. I'm just going to finish out what I didn't configure just then in the command line to show it actually working. Okay, so 42. All right, and the command I'm going to send it is I need to go to the loopback interface. So I created the loopback interface and applied an IP address to it, but I did not configure it. Now what I can do is I can actually kind of play around with the order here. But yeah, you know what, let's just go int lo1, and then I'm going to say IP router OSPF underlay area 0. Okay, now I can do router OSPF underlay, and in that one I can Now I will say router ID of 10.10.10 or 20.1, and let's send that. So now it's going to send that off. Okay, now I've got all successes. So if I head back over to my switch here, and I say show run OSPF, so I've got the underlay was configured and the router ID was configured on the interface loopback 1, IP router OSPF underlay area 0. So it did push out the remaining commands after what I had configured. So again, this is just what you need to realize as far as doing it. You don't have the benefit here. So while you're programming it out and you're building out your commands that you're going to send into that function, you might want to have to play around with a test bed environment or test Nexus switch. I've got a video about using Cisco Modeling Labs. You can also use the DevNet Sandbox. I've got a video about that. I'll link them in the description below. All right, so that was my step-by-step tutorial on how to create a file, a Python file that you can use to interface with a Cisco Nexus 9000 series switch. All right, so as I said, I'm going to take that file that I created, I'm going to put it in my GitHub for you to reference. But I do encourage you to try to build it yourself or go back through this tutorial, watch it, pause it at the certain points, and go through building this out yourself. So that way you can help gain and grow that knowledge. I'm also going to put some resource links down in the description below, as well as some information as to where you can get the sandbox or lab access, or maybe even get your own copy of Cisco Modeling Labs, so you can build out your environment for doing this. Now, the links for learning resources that I put below, they are going to be affiliate links, so do with that what you will. But as always, keep learning, keep improving, keep studying, and I will see you in the next video. Thank you.